Well, g'day. Welcome back to another episode with the Lifestyle Pioneers. I'm Simon. If you haven't watched any of our videos, we are travelling around Australia full time and sharing our adventures on YouTube. So if you haven't seen our travel vlogs, feel free to go and check those out while you're here on our channel. Now this video is going to be a little bit more of a, I don't know, what I call a technical video. If you've watched my video about towing weights or our walk around videos, things like that, I really want to try and do more of this content. This is something that I really want to get involved in more this year. It's always been on the back burner. Obviously, really, we're pretty busy with everything else that we're doing, but this is something I'd really like to try and do, is create more content like this. So if there's anything you'd like to know about traveling around Australia, overlanding, caravans, anything like that, four-wheel driving as well, that you'd like to see me do a video on, leave me a comment below and let me know, and I'll go through those, and yeah, we'll see what we can come up with. So in this video, I want to talk about trip planning. So everything to do with organising and planning a trip, whether that be a weekend away, a few weeks holiday, or a full-time or long-term trip like what we're doing, there's always going to be an element of trip planning involved. So I thought I'd just go through a little bit and share what resources I use, what the process I go through when we're planning out parts of our trip, and how we look at the overall picture as well. So let's dive in and take a look. It's really how you go about this depends, I guess. The number one thing you're going to always be thinking about is your time schedule and how much time you got available, and that's going to vary greatly depending on what you're doing. Even when you're traveling full time, we often find ourselves with places we want to be in by a certain point. Now, obviously, if you've watched our episodes up until this point, you know there was the occasion where we wanted to meet up with Mel and Pete to do the Flinders Ranges. Now we had to be in Alice Springs for Liz to fly out for this wedding. And in a few weeks, my mum's going to be in Darwin wanting to visit us and catch up. So that's going to be the next sort of thing that pegs us a little bit to time. It's not ideal, I don't think, when you're travelling, because sometimes it's, you know, we've got a sort of unspecified amount of time or a really long amount of time to be travelling. So it's good to travel without any sort of schedule, I think, when you can. But in reality, for most of us, that's not always possible. So I'm always looking at what time I got available, and then I start to look at, you know, where my end goal is, and fill in the gaps in between. As far as resources go and what I use, I don't think you can go past paper maps. I love having paper maps. I've got a few different versions. I carry, paper maps. I carry either HEMA or the Westprint ones are quite good. They're probably the two main ones I use. So I love my maps, all right? Now, I love paper because for a few reasons. You can spread the whole thing out and get a much better view than if you're using, you know, even a laptop or a mobile device to try and look at a map. I just like being able to get the big picture type look. The battery never runs flat on these, so you can look at them whenever, wherever. You don't need any phone service, and you can whip them out. I guess the only downside to them is you got to know where you are. You can't. These won't tell you where you are, whereas obviously a GPS device or something like that will. But the combination of the two is pretty formidable, pretty unstoppable, particularly if you're logging where you are at certain points and you've got a rough idea of where you are. These I think are invaluable. I've got a full Australia map. Now, because we're doing obviously most of Australia in our travels, this one's just a really good one to just whip out, even with the kids, and we just have a look at where we are, where we're trying to go next, and just get the full overview, I guess. So this is the HEMA one. Obviously, wouldn't really matter which one you got, but I like the detail on this. I think there's enough detail on it that you can see where you're going, as well as not being overly detailed that it's easy to read. It also on the back has just a little spiel about some of the main sort of regions of Australia and what there is to travel. So I guess it's a good starting point for a bit of high-level research of some of the areas you may want to go and visit. Folding up maps is a skill you should develop as well. So then from there I go down to state maps. So I've got, again, most of my maps are HEMA. I ended up I'll talk more about it, but I ended up buying a map pack before we left to sort of complement the maps I already had. But I collect a lot of maps. So Northern Territory, WA, state-based maps. This is obviously the next scale in. I like to have, you know, just a good overview of the state that we're traveling in and what the regions are. These are really good as well. And then I go into the more sort of specific regional maps. So this one's a top end one. This Westprint one was on the Simpson Desert, which even though we didn't do the Simpson Desert, I've actually got this map from a few years ago when I did travel into the desert. But it shows some good detail of the areas around the desert. Now, if you remember, we did Inaminka, Birdsville, Boolyah, across the Plenty Highway. All of that basically goes around the desert, and even to Alice Springs, where we've been most recently. That all sort of skirts around the desert. So this had some good detail of those roads and tracks and what's around there. And I've got a top end one, the Kimberley one, the top end and the Gulf. Now, I like having those regional maps. They have a little bit more detail. They generally have a little bit of tourist information in there as well, as far as some of the things to see and do in the area, rather than just points on the map, which I really enjoy. So yeah, then I go to the atlases and guides. So yeah, these obviously then, not so much for the mapping. They do have small maps in there and things like that. But this has got way more of your, your stopover points, your points of interest, your campsites. They often have like little mini itineraries in there to give you an idea of some of the things to see and do along the way. So I don't have these for everywhere we go, obviously, just the main ones. I got this one for the Kimberley. I do have one, I think I had one for the Flinders Ranges as well that I used. Just some of the more sort of, iconic, I guess, or diverse areas where you want a lot of information about what there is to see and do there. The one that we have in the car with us all the time is this big bad boy here. So this is the full Australian road and full drive atlas. This is the A3 version. They do an A4 version as well, but yeah, I like just the bigger one. It just makes the maps a bit easier to see and read. And this is the one we sort of have in the car that's just quick and easy to pull out. It doesn't obviously have quite the detail of some of the regional maps, but it's generally enough for us just to get an idea of where we're up to and where we're going. And I also draw on this one. I'm happy to draw in this one. I draw in it with pencil and just sort of mark where we stayed and things like that, what dates we were there, just for... It makes it easy when I'm editing these episodes, but it also, just for our own, for us to review and see where we went, in a year's time or a couple of years' time, if we're trying to remember where we went and where we stayed, that's going to be in there as a resource for us. So obviously on top of your paper maps, if you can't tell, I like nerding out on maps a fair bit. On top of your paper maps, you're also going to be obviously these days using some sort of GPS mapping. Now, I don't have any sort of specific recommendations when it comes to that. I've used a variety. They've all got their pros and cons, and that's probably a separate video in itself, is going into GPS systems and online navigation systems. But to be honest, for the majority of the country, you can get away with Google Maps. You can always download Google Maps offline as well. But obviously, when you start heading to more remote areas, don't trust the time frames that Google gives you, and don't think that necessarily Google's sending you the correct way. It obviously doesn't have as much data when it comes to those remote locations. So I guess I sort of start, like at the moment, I'm looking at going, we're down in the Alice Springs area, we're going to Darwin. So the state map is the one I sort of started with. Look at where we're going, start to figure out some of the points I may already know about, I may have heard about, may have talked to other travellers about, found out at a visitor information centre. These are the sorts of places we gather a lot of information. I'm not really for doing a heap of Googling and that sort of stuff and trying to do all your online research before you leave. I think sometimes it's really hard to get all that information and then figure out exactly how long you want to spend in a place. And so much of this stuff is subjective. As far as when you're talking to other people about where you should go and what you should see, something that someone else loves, even if we're telling you on our videos, this place is fantastic and you should go there, you may not be into that as much. You may get there and think, oh, I don't know what they were raving about. This place doesn't really do it for me. And in the same way, places that other people haven't recommended, that you just come across or that one person might mention to you as you're traveling, you go and check it out. You're like, how did I not hear about this? This place is amazing. Now, that can vary depending on what you're into, what you sort of like. We love bush camping, you may not. These sorts of things. It can also even depend on just even simple things like the weather. If we go there on a particular day, beautiful sunny day, and it looks like a magic spot, and the day you turn up, it's overcast, rainy, I don't know, the flies are really bad, whatever it is, it may turn you off. The conditions can be different when you're there. This has happened to us a lot of times in our travels. People have recommended places to us, and we've gone there and thought, don't know what all the fuss is about. It doesn't seem that great. But often in those times, it's been due to the weather or something else. So, and just your mood at the time even. It sounds silly, but it can really change your perception or interpretation of a place. So, yeah, they're the main ways we find out, I guess, about what there is to see and do along the way. So another really good resource for you is going to be our brand new website. We're really excited to be launching this. It's not quite live yet. We're really hoping it's going to be up to speed in the next few weeks. So give us a follow on social media, on Facebook or Instagram or both, and we'll be announcing there as soon as our new website goes live. It's going to be a huge resource for you. There's going to be heaps of information on there when it comes to traveling and everything to do with traveling, how to plan your trips, where we go, all these sorts of things. We're going to build that website out to be a huge resource. So as soon as it goes live, we'll let you know, and you can get over there and check that one out as well. So when you're sitting down to try and figure out exactly where you want to go and how you want to get there, paper maps are obviously vital. Word of mouth, talking to other travellers or visitor information centres, we always find really useful as well. And these days, social media as well. So jump on to, you can use Facebook, Instagram, obviously YouTube like you are now to do some research. We share obviously a lot of our trip onto YouTube, but if you want to see some other information about campsites and things like that and different places that we visit, jump over and follow us on Instagram and Facebook as well, because we share everything there in a little bit more detail sometimes as well than what we necessarily can do in our videos. The other thing that we use a lot is the WikiCamps app. As soon as you talk to any traveller, anyone who's travelling, this has become the go-to app, and not just for campsites. It also shows a lot of points of interest. It gives you a lot of information for trip planning when it comes to fuel stops, where water is available, phone service if you need that like we do sometimes, dump points if that's something you need, all of these sorts of things that travellers need on a map, and you can filter your results. I could go into so much detail about what there is in WikiCamps, but I think it's a pretty low cost app. It might cost, I think it costs about $6 or something like that, and honestly it'll pay for itself in its first night, because the first night you find a free camp that you may not have known about, I think it's paid for itself. So I honestly would pay 50 or $60 for it. I reckon maybe even more. It's a fantastic app, and it pays for itself really quickly. And then obviously you want to be planning your resources and things like that. So I use an app called Fuel Map. It's really handy for that. It also logs our whole trip. There's a logbook feature in there as well. I think it's a really handy app. So I'll leave a link in the description below that's going to link you through to where you can go and pick up some of those HEMA maps. I'd really recommend those. And I'll leave a link there as well for WikiCamps app. I'd really recommend going and getting that one, and the Fuel Map app as well is a really handy one as well. So check that out. You can also download national parks apps depending on which state you're in. I know New South Wales has quite a good one. There's other states do as well, where you can find out a little bit more information about national parks and things like that in that state. So they can be really handy ones as well. So they're the main things I use when we're trip planning, is basically start with the paper map, get an idea of where we're going to go, how far things are away and things like that. Word of mouth is great, talking to other travellers as you're going, particularly if you're coming across people that are travelling in the opposite direction to you. They've obviously just been in the area you're probably travelling into, so they're a great resource. Visitor information centres we use a fair bit. They can be really, well, in general, they're really good. We've found them to be really handy as a source of information. And then probably the last thing I use is Google, just to get a bit more detail if I want it, or if I've forgotten details about a place. And then WikiCamps to figure out where we might stay, checking the reviews and things like that of campsites, where we're going to probably be able to get fuel, where we're going to be able to get water, all these sorts of things to sort of try and plan out our resources a little bit. So when it comes to planning your route and looking at where you're going to go, you're obviously going to want to keep an eye on as well what the road conditions are like, what types of roads you're likely going to be travelling along. Now, if you want to stay on sealed roads, whether you're happy to travel on gravel, whether you want to do some four-wheel drive tracks, it really just depends what you're in for. To me, I mean personally, I like to look for the path less travelled. We like to try and get off the main highways where possible and explore a little bit further into sort of the less travelled areas of the country. That may not be for you though. You may, for whatever reason, may want to stay on the formed highways and things like that. So spend some time to sort of get an idea of what the road or the track conditions are going to be like where you're going. If you're towing, you obviously need to make sure it's a suitable road to be towing on, although that information it can be a challenge to find as well. So you just got to do your best to sort of figure it out. Again, you're going to be using the similar sort of resources, social media, online, and talking to other travellers and things like that. Visitor information centres, there's generally some good government websites as well that have up-to-date information for a lot of the outback roads and things like that, and the conditions that you can expect. And you also need to be aware of the weather in some of those areas as well. Obviously, wet weather in some of the more remote and outback areas can cause roads to be closed and things like that. So you need to be aware of that and just stay flexible and always have a contingency. So that hopefully gives you a little bit of idea of how we sort of figure out where we're going to go and what we're going to do when we get there. But then I guess the only last thing on that is I never try and sort of say an itinerary as far as where we're going to spend each night, much beyond just sort of looking at places and going, oh yeah, that might be good for a night or two, that might be good for 3 or 4 nights, 5 nights, whatever, or we might stay there a week, whatever it is, just to get a rough idea of your whole plan, just because I think being flexible is the number one thing. Now that's obviously more difficult the shorter the time that you've got to spend is, but I'd always try and err on the side of seeing less and spending more time there, because I don't know, you can rush around and try and see a lot. I'd rather slow down, even if you've only got a few weeks to travel. Don't try and see too much. Just see the places that you're going to in a bit more detail, and that way you're leaving something to go back to, but also you sort of, I don't know, you get a better idea of what you want to go and see more of and what you don't. But I'm going to start rambling now, so I'm going to wrap this up. But yeah, I would just basically say, do what suits you. What suits us is minimal planning, minimal sort of itinerary. I know that doesn't suit everyone, but yeah, just stay flexible because of the things I said before. You may not want to spend as long in places as you thought, or vice versa. You may want to spend longer in places you didn't realise were that good. So that's it. That's what I'm going to do today. Just sit down and plan out our next few weeks, figure out which way we're going to go, which routes we're probably going to take, and start to just get an overview, I guess, a high-level idea of what the rest of this month or next few weeks is going to look like, and then we'll go from there. But the number one thing is, just get out there. Get out there and see it. There's so much to see and do. And you don't have to go bloody miles from your house if you've only got a few weeks up your sleeve. Have a look at what's nearby, and travel those areas and just get into it. You can't go wrong, really. All right, that'll do for today. I'll see you later.